I'm Cynthia McKinney, the Congresswoman from the 4th Congressional District of Georgia, which is Stone Mountain, Georgia, that same Stone Mountain that Dr. King made famous in his I Have a Dream speech, and things have changed in Stone Mountain, but not quite enough. Basically, the most important thing to take to the people is the truth. And a member of the Atlanta City Council called me right after my legendary remarks about what did the administration know and when did they know it about September 11th. He called me up and he said, Cynthia, you know, once you become an elected official, you get the keys to the file cabinet. And they will even allow you to look inside the file cabinet. But Cynthia, you're not supposed to tell what's in it. Well, I told what was in it because I thought it was the right of the American people to know. That's what investigative journalists do. That's what whistleblowers do. And that's what members of Congress ought to do. Because we are charged with stewardship over the people's money and the people's values. And the way the money is spent and the policies that are promoted ought to reflect the people's values. And when they deviate, it's up to us to blow the whistle, to sound the alarm, and to tell the truth. We're very deviated. It is amazing to me that the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, can come before the House Armed Services Committee, on which I serve, and basically admit, yes, we can't find $2.3 trillion, but America can afford it. And by the way, we need to spend more money on defense. And oh, oops, we also changed U.S. military policy so that we could seize foreign capitals and occupy them. Now, that was the announcement that Donald Rumsfeld made before the United States Congress without any discussion by the American people about what the implications were of, one, having lost so much money. Now, an accountant tells me that while they tell us that the money was lost, that it really is that the money went someplace and they don't want to tell us where it went. So we've got that situation, and then we've got a vast change in the U.S. military posture, and that will allow our military to go into foreign lands, seize their capitals, and then occupy them without one whit of national discussion about what that means. I voted no against all of the preliminary steps that were brought before the Congress to sanction the war against Iraq. But then the president in March of 2003 went into Iraq, and we learned what Donald Rumsfeld meant when he said seize foreign capitals and occupy them. You see, the Pentagon continues to tell the auditors, the nation's comptroller, the General Accountability Office, and the United States Congress and the American people that the reason they can't balance their books is because, well, you know, their computers don't talk to each other. And so therefore, until they can get their computers to talk to each other, they won't be able to tell us where all of this money goes. Well, darn it. So I asked the question, well, who's got the contracts and how much has been spent? The comptroller for the Pentagon told us that $20 billion has been spent trying to get the computers to talk to each other. That is captured on tape, and they still don't talk to each other. It's a travesty. It's criminal. It's corrupt. And I just don't understand. It continues to amaze me why the American people allow this to continue to happen year after year, budget after budget, without a tremendous outcry. Not only are we far away from, we've deviated from our values in the area of military spending and the treatment of the Pentagon and how these people come to us and tell us these outlandish, outrageous stories. But we're also very far from American values in terms of the president's recent admission about the presence, the existence of secret prisons. Secret prisons where upwards of 14,000 people around the world are being held without access to an attorney, without access to even know why they're being held. Probably, in some cases, without even access to know where they are. Secret renditions, where the United States government is kidnapping people, kidnapping them. Torture. Abu Ghraib. Abu Ghraib, the photos from Abu Ghraib are just a mere indication of how far we've sunk in our own respect for human life, human dignity, in respect for our own laws, our own values, our own traditions, international law, that we would sanction the kind of torture that took place in Abu Ghraib. Guantanamo. Guantanamo shouldn't even belong to the United States. And yet we've got torture and illegal detainment of people going on. And the idea was to do it on Cuban soil, which is an extension, unfortunately, of American soil for that particular military base, because then U.S. law wouldn't apply. Well, thank goodness, even as partisan as the Supreme Court has become, even the partisan Republican Supreme Court has said enough is enough. I make it a point to not participate in the so-called top secret classified briefings, which basically are a dog and pony show, which are an insult to the intelligence of most members of Congress. However, I don't go there because I know that if I am told something, I want to tell it if the American people deserve to know about it. I'm not going to keep secrets of things that betray the values of our country. And so I've been to enough of those classified briefings, first of all, to know that they don't tell you anything new. You can read about it in Christian Science Monitor, New York Times, or any investigative journalist will have already written the stories. And they aren't actually going to tell you the truth. And so those classified briefings, in my estimation, are a farce and a joke, and just another way to keep you bound into as a boa constrictor binds its prey. The members of Congress and people who are privy to these classified briefings are bound in such a way that they are not free to tell the truth to the American people. And obviously, when you have the kind of administration that we have today that can't be trusted, then we have to be able to blow the whistle and tell the American people the truth.
Now at that same hearing, you asked for the second time for a briefing on some of the war games that were taking place on 9/11. Now, you were really the first person to talk about that within government. It was brought up briefly in the 9/11 Commission hearings. What did you learn?
We learned that they lie. We know they lie, but we had the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Richard Myers, there, who said that actually the war games improved the ability of the American defenses to respond to the attacks on September 11th. But now, of course, we know with the release of the FAA tapes that there was just mass confusion. And we also learned that there were several war games going on, so that now I believe that it wasn't one or two or three, but it was more like 4, 5, or 6 war games that were going on simultaneous on September 11th and coinciding with the actual attacks. Why would they say things that aren't true? Because they're so accustomed to being able to get away with saying things to the American people that aren't true. And they're also not accustomed to members of Congress actually challenging them. It's one thing to ask on the first iteration a question and get the answer, but it's another thing to be able to go 2 or 3 layers deep in their response. For example, we had, this was back when I was on the International Relations Committee, we had a gentleman come in, and one of the members of Congress asked a question about Afghanistan and the quote tunnels, the camps, the training camps that were going on over in Afghanistan. And the question was asked, is it true that that the Americans, the United States government, provided the funding for the establishment of those training camps? And the gentleman responded, yes, that they were American-sponsored training camps, but that bin Laden had abused the privileges that were given because there was a noble cause of getting rid of ejecting the Soviets from Afghanistan. Well, then I asked if the gentle person who was posing the questions would yield so I could then follow on the same vein. My question was, is it not true that the United States government paid $300 million to the bin Laden family for the construction of the military camps? At that point, then the person who was testifying had no choice but to admit, yes, that the money had gone to the bin Laden family for the construction of those military training facilities in Afghanistan. However, he added that none of that money went to bin Laden himself. Of course, it was a joke.
So you actually held a 9/11 Citizens Commission. Tell me what you learned there and why you put it together.
Well, we put it together because it was about time somebody in Congress did. It was about time that somebody in Congress heard from the family members. And it's not just about hearing from them, but it's about critical analysis of what's done and critical questioning that will get us the answers that you and Loose Change are trying to provide to the American people. There we had family members, we had whistleblowers, we had academicians, we had scholars, we had government intelligence people, we had lawyers, we had international financial transactions experts, we had citizens in the audience, just average, ordinary people who were able to travel to Washington and go to the United States Congress and hear the truth about September 11th. The truth as has never been said or heard on Capitol Hill. It was all day, about 8 or 9 hours of testimony. And we heard from scholars like Peter Dale Scott, who talked about the relationship with between the CIA and what we now call Al-Qaeda. And I have to remind you that I did pay attention when the foreign minister of Great Britain, Robin Cook, who is now dead, described the Al-Qaeda as nothing more than the CIA's Rolodex. So we had Peter Dale Scott there. We also had an attorney by the name of Charles McMichaels, who talked about the police state. Now, ultimately, I think that's why the 911 Truth movement exists, because the American people have seen that this tragedy has been used by our government to redefine the character of our country, to take away the very freedoms that they say are the cause of why we were hit on September 11th. And without any real responses from the government as to exactly what happened. How is it that on 4 separate occasions on one day that $1 trillion military and intelligence infrastructure could fail? How could that happen? If for no other reason than respect for taxpayers' dollars, the Congress should have demanded an answer. The Congress didn't demand an answer and didn't get one. And in fact, quite frankly, Colin Powell, as our Secretary of State, promised to provide us a white paper on who exactly was responsible for carrying out the September 11th attacks. We never got the white paper, so we don't know who did it. And because this administration has lied so many times to the American people, then it's incumbent upon the American people to find the truth. So I admire the authors of Loose Change. I admire every individual who is organized in the 911 Truth movement. I admire the members of the 911 Truth movement because they are average, ordinary American citizens, at the end of the day, just like me, who ask important questions about the fundamental character of our country, about what it is our country is becoming, how it is that we are going to define ourselves and to our children and to the global community which we are charged to serve. We're not serving the global community, we're not serving our values, and we're certainly not serving our future. Well, what makes me really disappointed, and that's an understatement, is that Congress's role is oversight. And Congress, even today, you'll see members of Congress saying, well, we haven't implemented everything that the 911 Commission recommended. And the 911 commissioners have said that the administration obstructed them, lied to them. So how can you start with a document that you know is false and take that to the American people as a document by which Congress's accomplishments should be measured? It's circular. It's a very small box, and it's not truthful. So at the end of the day, the bottom line is that thank goodness for the 911 Truth movement. Thank goodness for Loose Change. Thank goodness for an inquisitive American citizenry that cares enough basically to put their lives on hold so that they can get to the bottom and tell us the truth that the administration won't tell us. My emphasis during the time that I was in Congress, use the past tense. I'm in Congress now, but I will be out soon. At the end of the 109th Congress, will end my tenure in Congress for the second time. And during the time that I've been in Congress, every year, I've done a hearing of some sorts on COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO is the counterintelligence program that was basically authored by the United States government to quash dissent. Basically, it targeted the African American community, what they in the FBI called black nationalist groups. They didn't only target black nationalist groups. When they said black nationalists, though, let me say that they were referring to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They were referring to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They were referring to the Nation of Islam and other organizations that had as a focus the upliftment and the improvement in the quality of life for black people in this country. But they also targeted Chicanos, Puerto Rican independentistas. They targeted Native Americans through the American Indian movement. They targeted Students for a Democratic Society, progressive white organizations. They targeted the general white population that might adhere to a message of social justice for this country's minority communities. And they targeted what they call the responsible Negro community so that they could drive a wedge between the black nationalist groups and the responsible Negro groups. And basically, we can see the beginning of COINTELPRO in a document that was written in 1919 by J. Edgar Hoover. Yes, he was around even in 1919 doing dirty work on behalf of the United States government. And when I say on behalf of the United States government, let me make it clear that ordinarily, as you talk about the constitutional republic that we have, the United States government is supposed to be a reflection of the will of the American people, but it is not so. And in some cases, and in this case in particular, when I say the United States government, I mean a small little cabal of people who have control over the reins of power and able to wield influence in ways that they shouldn't be able to because they are not necessarily elected or appointed to anything. Now, with that having been said, J. Edgar Hoover in October of 1919 noticed that Marcus Garvey, quote, excited the Negroes. And as a result of this ability that Marcus Garvey had to excite the Negroes, he had to be targeted. And he was targeted with putting a paid informant who also was black in his coterie. And eventually Marcus Garvey was deported unjustly on trumped up charges. That's the kind of thing that is now permissible under the Patriot Act. It's an unethical kind of behavior, but the Patriot Act allows the United States government under this excuse of fighting the war on terror, a war against terrorism, to basically become terrorists. The COINTELPRO program, the counterintelligence program, as operated by J. Edgar Hoover, also used the media of the day in order to shape the ideas of the American public at large against these organizations and the individuals who led them. And so we shouldn't be surprised to see that the United States government is paying journalists to write their stories, paying to establish organizations that promulgate these deceptions, basically. And perhaps most tellingly, the founding document of the COINTELPRO paper said that the FBI's goal was to misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize these organizations and the leaders of these organizations. So that also meant telling lies on people, disrupting their marriages. It also meant snooping into their bank accounts, their medical records. It meant breaking into their homes and looking at what kinds of activities were in their personal papers. So we shouldn't be surprised if we have those sneak and peek provisions that are carried out today, because they're now legal because of the Patriot Act, or snooping into one's medical records or financial transactions, all legal now because of the Patriot Act. At a time when these activities were illegal, from the early 1900s all the way up to the 1960s and the 1970s in particular, especially intensifying during the rise of the anti-Vietnam War movement. It was Senator Frank Church who made these papers and made these behaviors known to the American people, and he called them un-American, and he called them illegal. Now they are most American, and they are most legal because of the Patriot Act. Well, certain people have never had American law applied to them. And so I would say that the whole construct is bogus to start with. Dr. Martin Luther King was certainly not a terrorist, but he was viewed as such. Nelson Mandela was not a terrorist, but he was viewed as such. And so Dr. Martin Luther King had to be neutralized. That's not my language. That's not my word. That's not my term. The FBI used that term when they said that they had to neutralize the leaders of these organizations. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was treated during his day in an illegal manner, but he was treated as today's terrorist. Honestly, the reason you exist is because of the failures of the media. And we have to make that very clear. The American people, the inquisitive American people, and those who are interested in finding out answers to their questions, have turned to alternative media, have turned to the internet, have turned to citizen activists who are doing the same thing. They grab a camera and they go out and they seek the truth. And then when they put their newfound production skills together, they tell us the truth. And so that's how Loose Change even came to exist, because you couldn't count on CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, CNN, UPN, WB, BET, MTV, VH1. You couldn't count on them to tell us the truth. And so you had to take it upon yourself to tell the American people the truth. First of all, for yourself, to tell yourself the truth, to inform yourself of the truth. And then, once learning the truth, you felt compelled to tell other people the truth, to share that truth. I can tell you, as someone operating in the political milieu, that perhaps the most important question that remains unanswered is, who are we? Well, I think litigation, if the issue is subpoena power, litigation is one way to deal with that. Obviously, we've been through the congressional route, and as Congress is currently constituted, that's not going to work. So, again, what we now know is because of people power. And I think we have to go back to people power. The last bill that I introduced during my previous tenure in Congress during 2002 was a piece of legislation that would have allowed the family members to participate in the Victims' Compensation Fund and not lose their ability to sue. It is clear to me that the construction of, or the construct of the Victim Compensation Fund was to quash the ability of the family members to have that necessary subpoena power to get at the truth. So litigation is always an answer. But what we've learned from the COINTELPRO experience is that in order to have successful litigation, you've got to have good lawyers. And what the counterintelligence program sought to do was to stymie legal actions by stacking the deck with bad attorneys. And we saw that happen, for example, after the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with this intense effort to make sure that James Earl Ray had the right attorneys, who actually were the wrong attorneys, who were trying to get him to plead guilty so there wouldn't be a trial at all. So we've got to get as much onto the public record as possible, and that is going to be forced. That is not something that is going to happen miraculously out of the concern that the government authorities have for the well-being of the American people or the global community. We've already seen that that's not going to work. Well, as you know, I've been kicked out of Congress for a second time by the Republicans. And so I guess I have a unique story to tell. I've tried to tell the American people the truth. And this is what happens when you do something like that. So it's okay, because I understand that that's the way the game of politics is played. I wish it were different, however. And the only thing that we can do is to struggle together to make those kinds of changes so that no one else will go through what I've gone through just because I want to tell the truth, or because they choose to tell the American people the truth. The good thing, I think, is that we've seen a coming together. There is no left or right. There is no Democrat or Republican. There are those who seek the truth. And so we have truly built a movement based on one objective, and that's finding out the truth. So the True Rainbow Coalition that the writers of the COINTELPRO documents were so afraid of can happen today. They were afraid of it. They let us know they were afraid of it. They wrote it down. We were smart enough to read it. And so while they try to divide black and white and Asian and Latino, Native American, they want to divide us by race, ethnicity, language, gender, socioeconomic status, any kind of difference that exists between and among people, they would like to use as a means to drive a wedge between us. But because we are all joined in one mission, and that mission is for the truth about what happened on September 11th, because the implications and the ramifications have been so vast and so great and so earth-shattering in terms of the change of the character of our country and the change of who we are to the rest of the world and the impact on the global community that we all care so much about, we've been able to put those differences aside. I see good things happening. I see a greater America coming out of this tragedy as a result of our learning that we can work together for a much greater cause, and we must. I've read a lot of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s writings lately. And in one of them, he talks about silence.
There
being,
comes a time when silence is betrayal.
That's right.
Yeah.
Silence is betrayal. And there's another quote where he talks about those in suits not getting justice served. And, you know, we've seen that happen even in his own murder, that those responsible for his murder walk the streets freely and find America as a safe haven. In much the same way that those who have done America's dirty work over the years, for example, in Haiti, Emmanuel Constant, who was the CIA paid leader of FROP, walks the streets of America with impunity, even though people were murdered on the streets of Haiti by the organization that he founded that was supported with U.S. tax dollars. So justice, another one of those King sayings, justice delayed is justice denied. And we have to hope for justice. But unfortunately, I don't see justice coming to the real purveyors of deception, violence, death, and destruction, who are holding the realms of power in our country. And there's something tragic about that. The survivors of those who were killed on September 11th carry around a tremendous weight every day. That weight is the fact that their loved ones will never be with them ever again. Only in spirit, only in mind, but not in body.
Given you know, the United States' long history of false flag terrorism attacks, starting with McKinley in the Maine, moving on to even Gulf of Tonkin, you know, to get us entrenched into Vietnam, Gladio, the overthrow of the Chilean president, overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, is it more likely that, you know, 9/11 was carried out by 19 Arabs with box cutters, or that this is a false flag operation by a cabal within the government?
I think it's so instructive that loose change begins with Operation Northwoods. There is no understatement possible when one refers to Operation Northwoods, because they wrote it down. They wrote it down and they said, well, you know, if we get university kids while they're on vacation, the nation will be outraged. They wrote it down about wreaking terror on the streets of Miami and Washington, D.C. They wrote it down about blowing up airplanes and blowing up airliners. And why? So they can have a war? In that case, it was war against Cuba. So if our Joint Chiefs of Staff can draw up a plan to facilitate war by killing innocent American people, I don't know that they've become any more benevolent since the 1960s.
Ms. McKinney, thank you for your time. That was awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Very cool.